Laila Al-Mansoor was the wife of one of Dubai's most powerful men. Karim Al-Fahd was a decorated police officer sworn to protect the city's elite. Their secret affair was as dangerous as it was forbidden, and when it was finally uncovered, it triggered a chain of events that ended in blood, silence, and a cover-up too perfect to be believed. In the bustling city of Dubai, known for its glittering skyline and unshakable order, Officer Karim Al-Fahd was a name synonymous with discipline and dedication. A man in his early 30s, tall and composed, Karim had built a flawless reputation within the Dubai police force. Colleagues often spoke of him with admiration, calling him the gold standard of professionalism. He rarely socialized, always stayed focused during patrols, and maintained a spotless record that earned him commendations from top brass. His rise through the ranks had been steady and uncontroversial, and it was this consistency that made him the perfect candidate for high-security assignments, especially those involving the royal family. Karim's presence at state events and royal affairs became more frequent. Over time, he was trusted with guarding high-profile dignitaries, including members of the royal household. It was a position few officers ever reached. The job came with its perks: access to the world of the elite, higher pay, and a kind of silent power. But with it came intense pressure, secrecy, and the constant reminder that failure would not just mean demotion, but disgrace. Still, Karim handled his duties with quiet efficiency. To everyone around him, he was the kind of officer every parent hoped their child would become. But even the most controlled exteriors can hide stormy depths. What his fellow officers didn't know was that Karim had grown disillusioned. Years of watching the opulence around him had created a silent bitterness. He walked through marble-floored palaces and guarded billion-dirham events, but went home to a modest apartment in Dera. He wore the same uniform each day, saluted men who treated him as invisible, and bit his tongue every time he witnessed injustice masked as tradition. Deep down, Karim began to feel like a ghost living in a city of kings. His quiet frustration started manifesting in subtle ways. He began taking longer patrol routes, extended breaks, and weekend shifts no one else wanted, just to spend more time alone. His superiors noticed, but dismissed it as a sign of commitment. Meanwhile, he used these moments to explore corners of the city rarely seen by tourists. Hidden cafes in old Dubai, midnight walks along the creek, and drives to the edge of the desert where the city's glow faded into black. It was during one of these lonely drives that Karim began making decisions that would change the course of his life. He also started spending more money, more than his salary should have allowed. Expensive watches, tailored suits, and a sports car he claimed was second-hand. When colleagues asked how he could afford it, he brushed it off with vague mentions of a family inheritance. No one pressed further. After all, it wasn't uncommon for officers in his position to have hidden perks. But the truth was darker. Karim had found a different way to supplement his income, running errands for people in high places, cleaning up small messes that couldn't be handled officially. Nothing illegal, but not exactly ethical either. A threatening message delivered here, a forgotten document retrieved from a hotel suite there. He operated in gray areas, and the deeper he went, the harder it became to come back. At first these favors were rare, but soon people started to notice his discretion. Quiet envelopes of cash began appearing in his car. Names were never mentioned. Requests were made through intermediaries. He justified it to himself as a reward for his loyalty, a harmless transaction in a city where secrets were currency. But over time, these jobs became riskier. He became a man with two lives, one in the light of public service, the other in the shadows of privilege. Despite this, Karim remained careful. He never left a trace. No paper trail, no recordings, no digital footprints. If suspicion ever lingered, it faded quickly in the face of his unwavering performance. He was the perfect mask, a model officer hiding a man who no longer felt bound by rules. His life was a tightrope act performed high above the ground, with no net to catch him. And then came the assignment that would tip the balance. A royal gala, hosted by Sheikh Abdullah Al-Mansoor, a powerful and secretive figure whose reach extended far beyond Dubai. Karim was one of the officers selected to manage the event's private security. It was a mark of ultimate trust. That night, among the guests dressed in silks and diamonds, Karim stood watch with the calm intensity of a man who had done this 100 times. But what he didn't know was that his eyes would meet someone else's, and from that moment, nothing in his life would ever be the same. Layla Al-Mansoor was the picture of elegance, grace, and restraint. To the public, she was known as the jewel of the Al-Mansoor family, a woman whose life seemed wrapped in luxury and ease. Magazine covers praised her beauty. Charity galas showcased her generosity. She was always draped in the finest designer gowns, escorted in blacked-out luxury cars, her every appearance choreographed to perfection. But behind the grand image was a woman suffocating in silence. She had been married to Sheikh Abdullah Al-Mansoor since the age of 23. He was more than 20 years her senior, a man of immense wealth and influence. The marriage had been arranged, a common practice among the elite. There was no romance, only convenience and political advantage. In public, they smiled for the cameras. In private, they barely spoke. Layla's role was clear: maintain the image, bear children, and never question the rules of the household. The palace she lived in was vast, yet she felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Despite her surroundings, Layla was not naive. She had grown up in a diplomatic family and was well educated, fluent in multiple languages, and quietly observant. Over the years, she learned how to read people, how to avoid drawing suspicion, and how to bury her emotions behind flawless makeup and rehearsed smiles. Her husband often traveled, and when he was home, he was distant and controlling. Her movements were tracked, her calls monitored, friends were vetted. Even her staff reported back to the Sheikh. Layla learned to exist in isolation, her voice slowly fading behind the demands of duty and loyalty. But everything changed the night of the gala. It was a charity fundraiser held in the Sheikh's private estate. The guests were a mix of royalty, diplomats, and business elites. As always, Layla played her part, smiling, posing, exchanging pleasantries with strangers whose names she barely remembered. It was during this evening that she first noticed Karim Al-Fahd. He wasn't like the other guards. There was something about his stillness, his quiet focus, the way his eyes swept the room without looking rushed or distracted. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, and that made him stand out. Their first real encounter was brief, a passing moment near a corridor as she stepped away from the crowd. Karim had been stationed there, and for the first time in years, someone looked at her without expectation, without judgment. He didn't bow too low, didn't smile too wide, just a steady glance that saw her as a person, not a title. It startled her more than she expected. It was a look she hadn't seen in a long time. Over the following weeks, they crossed paths more often. Karim was quietly reassigned to additional events involving the Sheikh's family. Layla noticed the pattern, though she doubted it was coincidence. Whether he had requested it or someone had positioned him there was unclear. But what began as passing nods became longer glances. Moments turned into minutes. She began lingering longer in hallways, stepping away from guests under the guise of needing air, just to find him nearby. Neither spoke a word. Yet something unspoken had already taken root. Eventually, their silence broke. It started with a handwritten note, simple, careful, left in a book she'd been reading in the private library. No names, just words that spoke to the emptiness she'd been hiding. She replied with another note, and soon they began a secret exchange that carried more weight than 1,000 conversations. The notes turned into meetings. At first they were cautious. Brief encounters in gardens, fleeting touches in shadowed corridors. But the risk only deepened their connection. It was no longer just about longing. It was about being seen. As their meetings grew bolder, they began using burner phones. Kareem arranged everything with the precision of someone used to operating in the dark. Fake names, encrypted messages, and private drivers who asked no questions. They met in hotels under assumed identities, rooftop suites, desert villas, places no one would suspect. Their relationship was no longer a secret romance. It had become an operation. Layla knew what she was risking. If the affair was discovered, she would face far more than public disgrace. The Sheikh's wrath was legendary. Women who defied him vanished from the public eye, shipped quietly to foreign clinics or exiled under the pretense of illness. Kareem's fate would be worse: public humiliation, imprisonment, possibly death. And yet, neither of them stopped. Each meeting only pulled them deeper. For the first time in years, Layla felt alive. With Kareem, she could speak without fear. She could laugh without pretending. She could exist without hiding. But as their love grew in the shadows, so did the eyes watching them. Behind every wall and every closed door, danger crept silently. In Dubai, nothing stayed hidden forever. Dubai is a city that prides itself on control of image, order, and information. Nothing within the elite circles moves without notice, especially when the players involved belong to one of the most powerful families in the region. As the affair between Layla and Officer Kareem deepened, the illusion of secrecy began to crack. While they believed they were careful, they underestimated the reach of the man they were betraying. Sheikh Abdullah Al-Mansoor was not just a ruler. He was a strategist, a man who viewed his world like a chessboard, and everyone in it as pieces to be moved or removed. It started with small inconsistencies. Layla's driver, a man trained to obey without question, began reporting minor deviations in her schedule. Afternoon errands that stretched too long, appointments she insisted on attending alone, a detour to a luxury boutique where she never stepped inside. The Sheikh's household staff were trained to notice such details, and though no one dared speak of suspicions directly, the murmurs reached the Sheikh's inner circle. Rather than confront Layla, he made a quiet decision. He wanted evidence, not rumors. A private surveillance team was hired, separate from his usual security staff. These weren't regular guards. They were specialists, former intelligence officers, digital forensic experts, and men with no loyalty except to the person signing their paychecks. Their task was simple: uncover the truth and do it quietly. Layla's phone was cloned. Her laptop mirrored. Micro cameras were discreetly placed inside her dressing room, her private office, even the vehicles she used. GPS tracking systems were embedded in her handbags and jewelry. She had no idea her every movement was now part of a growing file. Kareem, too, became a subject of scrutiny. He had no reason to believe he was under watch. He continued his routine, believing his meticulous habits and insider knowledge kept him safe. But the Sheikh's team was always one step behind him, collecting fragments, surveillance footage from hotel lobbies, plate numbers from hidden garages, financial trails from cash-only bookings. Every moment he believed was private had been logged, cataloged, and analyzed. The final confirmation came when the surveillance team intercepted one of the burner phones. The encryption was strong, but not unbreakable. After days of decryption, they accessed messages that left no doubt. Names were avoided, but the tone, the timing, and the references aligned perfectly with the movements of Layla and Kareem. Love letters, meeting coordinates, plans for escape. The Sheikh, now in possession of undeniable proof, remained outwardly calm. He made no move, spoke no words of suspicion. In his mind, rage was a tool best used with precision. But something changed in Layla without her knowing why. She began to feel watched. At first it was just a sense, an unease that crept into her daily routine. Her favorite staff members were suddenly replaced. Her phone glitched at odd hours. Doors she left unlocked were found closed. She dismissed it as paranoia, the natural result of living such a dangerous lie. Kareem tried to reassure her, promising that their precautions were holding. But even he began to notice things out of place. A shadow that lingered too long on the street. A drone hovering just a bit too low near the villa they used. Signs that someone was closing in. They considered ending it. For days, their messages shifted in tone. There were discussions of fleeing the country, of disappearing without a trace. But both knew the reality. Layla couldn't simply walk away from the Sheikh, and Kareem's position meant he would never get past airport security if flagged. Still, the possibility lingered. Perhaps they could fake her illness, stage a foreign treatment trip, and vanish into Europe under new names. It was a fantasy, but one they began to believe in. What they didn't know was that the Sheikh had already made his decision. He would not confront them. He would not offer forgiveness or negotiate betrayal. His pride had been shattered, and in his world, betrayal was not just an insult. It was a threat to be eliminated. He would handle it like he did all problems, swiftly, silently, and without scandal. The surveillance phase was complete. Now it was time to clean the mess. Kareem and Layla were living on borrowed time, unaware that every step forward they took was already mapped out. In the shadows, plans were in motion. A team was being assembled. The final act had already begun. The villa on Palm Jumeirah was nothing out of the ordinary, at least on the outside. Tucked behind a high white wall and shaded by palm trees, it blended in among dozens of other opulent properties along the man-made island's crescent. It had been rented under a fake name, arranged by one of Kareem's trusted contacts, who had no idea who the true guests were. Inside, the decor was minimalist and elegant. Every detail had been chosen with care. It was the place where Kareem and Layla could finally breathe, away from the suffocating presence of cameras, duty, and fear, or so they thought. That night was supposed to be their last meeting. The pressure had become unbearable. Layla had noticed her wardrobe being checked. Kareem received an anonymous envelope with a single photograph. The two of them walking out of a hotel together, heads low, hands almost touching. No threat, no message, just the photo. It was enough. They agreed to meet one final time, to talk about escape or closure. Their messages had grown desperate. The world was tightening around them, and they both knew it. They arrived separately. Layla came first, dressed simply, face covered. Kareem followed shortly after, parking several blocks away and walking the final distance to avoid surveillance. Inside, there was no music, no wine, no celebration. Just tension. They sat in silence for long minutes, the air thick with the weight of what was unsaid. There were no arguments, no tears, just two people caught between love and survival. They discussed plans in low voices, voices they no longer trusted even in an empty room. Layla mentioned a friend in Geneva. Kareem suggested fake identities. But behind every idea was the same unspoken truth. They might already be too late. Unbeknownst to them, the villa was not as private as it seemed. Earlier that day, a silent entry team had broken in while the property was empty. Small cameras had been placed in vents, motion detectors installed near exits, and a silent alarm wired into the front door. Every sound inside the villa was being transmitted to a private location, monitored by a team of professionals. Their conversation, their movements, every moment of vulnerability, they were all being watched in real time. Around midnight, the electricity flickered. Just once. Brief, almost unnoticeable. Layla stood, startled, and Kareem moved to the window. The street was quiet. No cars, no footsteps. But a black SUV had appeared 2 blocks down, engine running, headlights off. Kareem's instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. They decided to leave immediately. Kareem grabbed a small bag he had packed earlier with emergency items. Documents, cash, a gun. Layla moved toward the door, but as she reached for the knob, the lights cut out completely. The villa was plunged into darkness. A moment later, glass shattered from the back of the house. They weren't alone anymore. Panic surged. Kareem pushed Layla toward the staircase, yelling for her to hide. She ran to the upstairs bedroom and locked the door behind her. Kareem stayed below, crouched behind a wall, weapon drawn. He didn't know how many there were, or who they were, but he knew one thing. They weren't coming to arrest him. This wasn't police protocol. This was something else. Silence stretched across the house, broken only by the sound of careful footsteps on tile. The first shot rang out seconds later. It missed Kareem by inches. He returned fire, hitting one of the masked intruders in the shoulder. But they kept coming, trained, unafraid. A second shot caught Kareem in the leg. He stumbled but didn't fall. He knew he had minutes, maybe seconds. He made his way to the stairs, bleeding, trying to reach Layla. Upstairs, Layla heard the gunfire and froze. She pressed herself against the door, holding it shut. The sound of footsteps grew louder. A crash, a second shot. Then silence. Kareem never made it to the room. His body was later found near the base of the staircase, a bullet in his chest and another in his shoulder. The final kill shot was clean, between the eyes. A professional job. Upstairs, Layla's body was discovered on the floor beside the bed, ligature marks around her neck. No signs of struggle, no broken furniture. It was fast and precise. By the time authorities arrived, the intruders were gone. The cameras had been wiped, the alarm system reset. The story the media was given hours later was neat and simple. A tragic murder-suicide. A jealous officer turned violent. A secret affair exposed. Case closed. But the people who saw the scene knew better. Something about the angle of the wounds, the lack of blood splatter, the missing security footage. It all felt wrong. Yet no one dared to say it out loud. Not in Dubai. Not when the truth pointed toward power. The villa was cleaned, the bodies buried quickly, and the city moved on. At least that's what the official records say. In the days that followed the murder, Dubai's media outlets released polished statements carefully approved by royal advisors. Headlines painted the story with solemn finality: a disgraced officer, a heartbroken princess, and a crime of passion that ended in tragedy. News anchors delivered the story with rehearsed sympathy, emphasizing betrayal, honor, and justice. There were no questions asked, no investigations demanded. For the public, the case was closed. For the royal family, it was erased. Yet, behind the scenes, not everyone believed the official version. Within the police department, whispers spread like wildfire. Karim Al-Fahd had been a respected officer. He had never shown signs of instability, never hinted at violence. His service record was clean, his conduct professional. To those who had worked beside him, the story of a sudden breakdown and murder-suicide didn't add up. But in a country where questioning the official narrative could destroy a career, or a life, most chose silence over suspicion. One junior officer, however, couldn't let it go. His name was Tariq Aziz, a quiet investigator with a reputation for thoroughness. He had once been mentored by Karim, who taught him that justice wasn't just about following rules, but understanding when those rules protected the wrong people. When Tariq heard the news of Karim's death, he felt more than grief. He felt doubt. The timeline didn't make sense. The lack of CCTV footage, the speed of the investigation, the unavailability of forensic reports, it was all too convenient. Tariq began digging. Quietly, cautiously. He pulled Karim's case file under the pretense of reviewing closed cases. Most of it had been redacted. He reached out to the hotel that Karim and Layla had allegedly visited days before the murder. Their security footage had been deleted. He contacted the rental agency that leased the villa. The records were sealed. Every trail led to a dead end. Still, Tariq pressed on. He visited the crime scene, even though it had already been cleared and sanitized. Something bothered him. The blood patterns, the trajectory of the bullets. They didn't match the narrative of a struggle between two lovers. Karim had been shot cleanly, with precision, not in a frenzied act of rage. Layla had no defensive wounds, no bruises, no torn clothing. Her death had been silent, intentional, planned. Tariq took photos of what little evidence remained. He mapped out the villa's layout, spoke to neighbors, and pieced together a timeline. It was then that he stumbled across something unexpected: a maintenance worker who had seen two men in black uniforms enter the property the day before the murders. When asked if they wore police badges, the man hesitated, then said no. He never saw them leave. Tariq compiled everything he found into a private file and backed it up on multiple encrypted drives. He didn't know who to trust. His own department might be compromised. The deeper he looked, the more he felt the presence of something dangerous just beyond reach. Then the warnings began. His home was broken into, but nothing was stolen. Just his desk drawer, where the backup drive had been kept. An anonymous message was left on his windshield. "You're digging in a graveyard." His phone began to glitch. Colleagues grew cold. One even warned him quietly in a hallway. "If you want to keep your badge, stop chasing ghosts." Tariq knew what that meant. He shut down the investigation. He burned the physical files. He deleted the drive, but not before sending a copy to a secure location outside the country. A journalist friend in Europe who owed him a favor. He included a note. "If anything happens to me, this story must live." Months passed. The case faded from memory. Layla's name was removed from charity events. Kareem's commendations were quietly stripped from department records. The villa was sold to an overseas investor. Life in Dubai resumed its rhythm. But 1 year later, an anonymous expose appeared on an international news site. It was detailed, with names, locations, surveillance logs, and forensic inconsistencies. It didn't accuse anyone outright, but it raised enough questions to spark outrage. The piece went viral. Human rights groups began demanding answers. The UAE government called it foreign misinformation. The Sheikh's office denied everything. Still, the story spread. Podcasts dissected it. Independent investigators followed the threads. Kareem and Layla became symbols of love, of rebellion, of truth buried under wealth and power. Their story, once meant to be forgotten, refused to die. Some say Tariq disappeared. Others say he fled to Europe and continues to work under a new name. No one really knows. But once in a while, new documents surface. New whispers emerge. A photo, a passport scan, a recording. Justice, even in silence, finds its way.